I never imagined that a single phone call could break a man in half, but that day proved me wrong in a way I will never forget. It happened on a quiet afternoon, the kind of afternoon where you can hear the birds outside and the wind brushing against the fence, and the world seems so ordinary that you almost believe nothing bad could possibly happen. I was sitting in my old wooden chair, the one I have kept for years, because it is the only thing in this house that makes my back feel steady. The sun was shining through the window, and everything felt calm, predictable, safe. Then my phone buzzed. I looked down and saw my daughter's name. Emma, my only child. The person I raised with my own two hands. The little girl I carried on my shoulders. The little girl whose tears I wiped. The little girl I always thought would never forget who I was and what I meant to her. I answered with a smile in my voice. "Hey, sweetheart." But I did not hear the voice of a daughter. I heard a stranger. A cold tone. A tight-clipped voice that sounded like it was holding something heavy, but not heavy in a sad way, heavy in an annoyed way. Like she was calling me because she had to, not because she wanted to. She said, "Dad, I need to talk to you." Right then my stomach twisted, because whenever she started a sentence that way, it meant she was about to say something she knew I would not like. But nothing in this world prepared me for what came next. Not the hard years, not the broken dreams, not the struggles I pushed through. "Dad, I don't want you at my baby shower." Her voice did not shake. She did not hesitate. She said it as if she was choosing a shade of paint or picking an appetizer from a menu. Calm. Zovd. Final. I sat there frozen. I felt the warm sunlight on my face turn cold. Like someone had opened a door, and a gust of winter wind rushed in and wrapped around my chest. My daughter. My flesh and blood. The child I raised after her mother left. The one I worked double shifts for. The one I carried through every illness. The one I encouraged through every failure. Was telling me that I did not belong at one of the biggest moments of her life. She kept talking. Her voice turned sharper. "You make things awkward, and you always bring drama. I just want a peaceful day. It is better if you stay home." Awkward. Drama. Made. Those words stabbed deep in a place inside me that I did not even know still hurt. I had heard insults in my life. I had been cursed at. I had been blamed. But hearing my daughter describe me like that, like I was some embarrassing object she wanted to hide in a dark corner, that was something else. That was a wound that did not bleed on the outside, but bled slowly and painfully on the inside. I stared at the wall while the voice kept pouring through the phone. But the words no longer made sense. All I could think about was the little girl I raised. The one who used to run into my arms after school. The one who used to sit on my shoulders while I walked through the county fair. The one who used to say, "Daddy, you are my hero." When did that child disappear? When did she grow into someone who could cut me down with a few cold sentences? When did I stop being her father and start being her problem? I wanted to defend myself. My chest burned with that heavy feeling you get when you are holding too much in. I wanted to say, "Emma, I was always there for you. Emma, I love you more than anything. Emma, you are breaking me right now." But the words never came. Because even when your child hurts you in ways that make your heart crack, you still hold the pieces quietly. You do not throw them at them. You do not scream. You do not accuse. Because that is what fathers do. They swallow the pain and try to stand tall, even when the weight feels impossible. So I took a long, slow breath. I held my pride together like someone holding a fragile object in trembling hands. And I said, "All right, if that is what you want." I wanted to add something. Anything. But before I could finish, she hung up. Just like that. Like the conversation meant nothing. Like I meant nothing. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time. My fingers felt numb. My heart felt heavy. My breath felt tight. I walked out into my small backyard where the sky was turning orange as the sun began to set. The same backyard where I taught her how to ride a bike. The same backyard where we had summer barbecues and she used to run around with sticky fingers and cotton candy smiles. I stood there remembering everything. Every sacrifice. Every moment. Every small piece of myself that I had given to her without ever expecting anything back. Then one question echoed through my mind. What happened to my little girls? When did she stop seeing me as her father and start seeing me as a burden? I felt tears in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not because I wanted to be strong, but because the pain felt too deep for tears. It was not the kind of sadness you cry about. It was the kind of sadness that sits heavy inside your chest and makes you feel hollow. In that moment, I realized something important. Something that changed everything that came after. I realized that if I went to that baby shower, it would only make things worse. I would walk into a room filled with people who already believed whatever story she told them. I would show up with love, but be met with judgment. And Emma would look at me like I was the problem in the room. I was not going to let her humiliate me. Not after a lifetime of loving her. So instead of showing up, instead of walking into a place where I was no longer wanted, I made a decision that changed the entire story. A decision that shook her world. A decision that taught her a lesson she would never forget. I sent someone else. Not to attack. Not to embarrass. But to reveal the truth she had been hiding. The truth she had been running from. The truth she needed to face. And that right there, that moment standing in my backyard with a broken heart and a quiet decision, became the beginning of the biggest lesson I ever taught her in my entire life. My name is Michael, and at 56 years old, I often find myself looking back at the life I lived, and the man I used to be, the man I worked so damn hard to become, the man I thought my daughter would always be proud of. I was born in a small American town, the kind of place where people still sat on their front porches and waved at whoever walked by, even if they barely knew them. Kids raced their bicycles on cracked sidewalks, mothers hung laundry outside, and the evening breeze always carried the smell of freshly cut grass mixed with the distant hum of passing cars. We didn't have much money, not the kind that bought fancy vacations or shiny new things, but we had routine, honesty, and a rhythm to life that felt steady, predictable, safe. My father worked in the steel mill, coming home every day with the scent of metal and sweat clinging to his shirt, and my mother cleaned houses for families who had a lot more than we did. But despite our simple life, despite the shortage of cash and the abundance of hard days, my parents gave me something far more valuable than anything money could purchase. They gave me respect, responsibility, discipline, and a belief that family was everything a person could ever truly count on. I grew up learning that you don't turn your back on family, you don't pick and choose when to show up, and you don't make excuses for abandoning the people who built you. I didn't step into adulthood with much. I didn't inherit money, property, or even a car that started on the first try. What I did inherit was a pair of calloused hands, a stubborn sense of duty, and a willingness to work until sweat soaked through my shirt. So when I became a young man, I worked long shifts at the factory, and on weekends I repaired lawn mowers for extra cash. Life wasn't easy, but it was honest, and honesty always felt better than comfort. Then came Emma. The day my daughter was born, the world looked different. I remember holding her tiny body in my arms, her fingers wrapping around my thumb like she already trusted me with everything she had. In that moment, I made myself a promise. No matter how hard life got, no matter how exhausted I felt, No matter how empty my bank account looked, I would give her a life better than my own. She became the brightest moment of my existence, the reason I breathed a little deeper, worked a little harder, pushed a little further. Every choice I made was for her. Every dollar I earned had her name written on it before it even touched my wallet. I was at every soccer game, every parent, teacher conference, every school project emergency that required a last-minute run to the store minutes before closing. I was the dad who showed up early and left last, the dad who clapped the loudest, the dad who never forgot a single thing she asked for. I was her protector, her provider, her personal cheerleader, her taxi driver, her fixer, her everything. But life has a way of shifting in ways you don't see coming. As Emma grew older, she also grew distant, not in the physical sense at first, but emotionally. The change came slowly, the kind of slow that sneaks up on you like fog rolling over a field. First, it was the embarrassment. She didn't like the way I dressed. My boots were old, my jeans were worn, my hands looked rough. She told me my jokes were outdated and my stories were boring. She started walking faster when we were in public, like she didn't want people to know we were together. I told myself it was just a teenage phase, that kids outgrow their parents before they realize they need them again. Then she went to college, and it was like someone had closed a door between us and locked it from the inside. Whenever I visited her, it felt like she was hiding me, hiding my clothes, my track, my way of talking, even the way I breathed. Every question I asked was answered in the shortest sentence she could form. Every attempt to connect with her felt like knocking on a wall. Still, I supported her. I paid for her tuition. I loaned her money for books. I gave her my old truck when hers broke down, even though I needed it for work. But the more I helped, the more the distance grew. She took everything I gave but offered nothing back. People warned me, told me I gave too much, told me she was using me, told me she was losing respect for me. But I couldn't accept that. She was my daughter, my only child. How could I believe she saw me as anything less than the father who raised her? Life kept moving. She graduated, started a job, and eventually got married. I walked her down the aisle that day, but even then something in her eyes looked uncomfortable, like she didn't want to be seen with me too long. When she introduced me to her husband's family, she said, "Dad does construction work. He's simple." That word hit me like a slap. Simple. As if being hard-working, honest, and reliable was something to be ashamed of. As if my hands, the same hands that built her childhood, somehow made me less worthy in her new world. Her husband, Mark, came from a polished background. Fancy careers, expensive daycare, voices that sounded like they had been ironed smooth. They scanned me with their eyes the way people scan used furniture, checking the flaws and dents. Emma started talking like them too, soft, polished, overly polite, the kind of politeness that hides judgment. But I swallowed it all. I kept quiet. I didn't want to make waves. I told myself peace was worth more than pride. But silence has a cost. And it came crashing down the day she called me and with a cold voice said, "Dad, don't come to my baby's shower." Just like that, no explanation, no hesitation. I froze, my chest tightened. My breath caught somewhere between shock and disbelief. I had imagined the day my daughter became a mother since the moment she was born. I imagined being the grandfather who held her baby and whispered, "Welcome to the world, little one." I pictured buying tiny shoes, rocking the baby to sleep, teaching them things I taught Emma. But instead, I was told to stay away, stay out, stay silent. She hung up before I could ask why. That night I sat on my porch staring at the stars, rubbing my tired hands together, feeling the memories burn in my chest. Memories of her first bicycle, the one I saved for months to buy. The graduation cap I ironed the night before her ceremony. The veil I fastened at her wedding while wiping my tears on my sleeve. And now, after everything I gave, everything I sacrificed, everything I built for her, she tossed me aside like a burden. A burden. That word whispered through my mind like poison. Was that truly what she saw when she looked at me now? But as I sat there, a realization began to settle deep inside me. I knew showing up at her baby shower uninvited would cause a scene. I knew staying silent would make her believe she could treat me however she wanted. But I also knew something else. Emma wouldn't learn anything unless she faced the truth head-on, unless she saw the consequences of the disrespect she had shown. So I decided on something different, a plan. A quiet, clever, painful plan. A plan that didn't involve shouting or fighting or begging. A plan that involved sending someone else in my place. Someone she would never expect. Someone who would walk into that glamorous, polished, picture-perfect baby shower and reveal the truth she'd been hiding, not from the world, but from herself. And as I sat on that porch, the night air heavy around me, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This time, she was finally going to learn exactly who her father really was. The morning after that call, that cold, sharp conversation that sliced straight through my heart, I woke feeling like someone had reached inside my chest and stolen something irreplaceable, something warm and sacred that I had carried for 56 years. The sky outside was the color of wet cement, thick clouds smothering the sun, the air so heavy it felt like even the wind didn't want to move. I sat at my old kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing colder by the minute, staring at the wall as if it held answers to questions I didn't know how to ask. I kept replaying her voice, that distant tone she used, a tone stripped of affection, emptied of warmth, almost like she was talking to a stranger she didn't know anything to. I kept trying to tell myself maybe she didn't mean it, maybe she was overwhelmed, maybe someone else, Mark, his prim and polished mother, his stiff-backed father, had whispered something in her ear. But the truth settled heavy in my chest. This wasn't sudden. This was years of slow erosion, years of tiny cracks, years of letting other people's opinions carve into her heart until there was no space left for the man who raised her. I looked at the calendar on the refrigerator, the one where I circled her due date in red months ago, the one I checked every week just to remind myself that a new little life was about to enter this world. A grandchild I'd dreamed about since the moment Emma took her first breath. 2 weeks until the baby shower, 2 weeks until the celebration of new life, 2 weeks until the day she didn't want me anywhere near. The thought pressed down on my chest like a weight I couldn't push off. I imagined the decorations, the balloons, the laughter, the plates stacked with cupcakes, the excited chatter of her in-laws passing gifts around. And right there in the middle of it all, an empty space where a grandfather should have been. I thought about ignoring her words, showing up anyway, walking through those doors even if she froze in place, even if her smile tightened, even if she looked at me the way people look at stains they hope no one notices. But I knew her too well. She wouldn't yell, she wouldn't scream. She'd let her silence speak for her, let the stiffness in her posture announce to everyone that I wasn't wanted, that I was the problem, the intrusion, the reminder of a past she wanted to erase. And that would hurt more than staying home. Then a darker thought crept into my mind, a thought I had tried so hard to avoid. Maybe she didn't want me there because she was embarrassed. Maybe she didn't want her in-laws to see the man behind the life she lived, the father with old boots, a faded shirt, and hands scarred from decades of labor. Maybe she had painted a picture of herself that didn't include me. Maybe she had told a story where I didn't fit anymore. The longer I sat there, the more my stomach twisted. Shame was a strange, quiet kind of pain, one that settled deep and whispered all the things you feared were true. I thought of how she used to cling to my arm as a little girl, how she would brag about me fixing anything, how she used to say, "My dad can do anything." And now she couldn't stand the thought of me standing in the same room as her polished new family. But the universe has a strange way of sending memories when you need them most. I closed my eyes and saw someone I hadn't thought about in months. My sister Charlotte, the strongest woman I ever knew. 5 years gone now, but still alive in the corners of my mind. She had been my backbone and my second pair of shoulders during the hardest parts of raising Emma. She was the one who braided Emma's hair, who took her to school when I worked double shifts, who taught her how to bake cookies and patch a scraped knee. Emma adored her. There were times she listened to Charlotte more than she ever listened to me, not because she didn't love me, but because Charlotte had that calmness I never fully mastered. And suddenly, like lightning splitting through a stormy sky, the idea hit me. What if someone else went in my place? Not to argue, not to embarrass her, not to demand anything, but to make her think, to hold a mirror up to her choices, to force her to confront what she was doing to the man who gave her everything. The thought grew roots inside me. Someone needed to stand in the space where I had been pushed out. Someone who knew Emma, who knew her heart, who knew our family, who understood the sacrifices I had made, someone who loved her enough to tell her the truth she didn't want to hear. That someone was June, Charlotte's best friend, a woman in her 60s with a presence that could calm storms or start them, depending on what the situation called for. June was the type of woman who wore her heart like armor and her voice like a blade. She didn't sugarcoat, she didn't tiptoe around feelings, and she certainly didn't let people forget where they came from. So I picked up the phone and called her. I didn't know how to start, didn't know how to explain the ache in my chest, didn't know how to put the betrayal into words. But once I opened my mouth, everything poured out, every detail, every memory, every word Emma had spoken to me. I told her about the phone call, the shame, the distance, the years of quiet hurt. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. A silence that stretched long enough for me to wonder if I had made a mistake, if maybe this wasn't my place to ask. And then June spoke. In a steady, unwavering voice she said, "Michael, you listen to me. Your daughter forgot who raised her, but I will remind her." Her words hit me harder than any blow I had ever taken, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. She agreed to go to the baby shower, not to fight, not to stir chaos, but to stand where I couldn't, to speak the truth I wasn't allowed to say, to walk into that polished event with the strength of the woman my sister had trusted with her whole heart. In that moment, the plan became real. A plan born from pain, but rooted in love. A plan that would change everything. And as I hung up the phone, for the first time since my daughter told me to stay away, I felt something quietly return to me. Not joy, not peace, but strength. The quiet, steady kind, the kind that builds from the broken pieces of a father's heart. The day of the baby shower arrived soft and bright, the kind of day that should have filled my chest with pride, excitement, and the warmth of knowing I was about to step into a new chapter of my life, grandfatherhood. The sky was clear, the sun spilled gold across the neighborhood, and the breeze carried that faint sweetness that always comes right before spring fully settles in. But for me, none of that mattered. The world was bright, yet everything inside me felt dimmed, muted, swallowed by a kind of quiet sadness that clung to my ribs like damp cloth. I sat alone in my living room, staring at nothing and everything all at once, imagining scenes I would never get to witness. I pictured my daughter smiling as she unwrapped tiny clothes, her hands smoothing over the soft fabric of baby blankets, her laughter mingling with the excited chatter of her friends. I imagined her placing her hand on her belly, the way expectant mothers do when they feel the baby move, a glow of pride that lights up their faces. I imagined the moment her eyes would shine with the joy of being celebrated. Those were moments I had dreamed about ever since she was small enough to sit on my shoulders. And yet, on the day they were finally happening, I wasn't welcome. I wasn't wanted. I wasn't invited. I stayed home because that is exactly what she told me to do. Because in her new world, in her polished life, there was no room left for the man who raised her. As I sat there in my silence, someone else was stepping into the space where I should have stood. June. At the same hour I was watching the sunlight crawl across my kitchen tiles, June was arriving at the baby shower venue, calm, composed, and carrying a purpose sharper than any knife. She dressed neatly, as she always did, her grey hair tied back in a way that made her look both elegant and unshakably strong. Her walk was steady, her shoulders firm, her eyes clear with a determination that could slice through steel. And in her hand she carried a simple gift bag, nothing glamorous, nothing loud. Just a soft-colored bag holding an old wooden box that I had kept safe for decades. That box wasn't just a box. It was a piece of my childhood, carved by my father's hands, polished by years of use, carrying a story that started long before my daughter was born. I had once dreamed of placing it in my grandchild's hands, telling them who made it, telling them where it came from, telling them about the legacy of honesty and hard work that built our family long before money or status mattered. But life had twisted in a direction I never expected, and that box now rested in June's hands as she walked through the bright doors of the baby shower. The venue was everything Emma loved. The decorations were soft pastel colors, delicate balloons floating near the ceiling, tables covered with lace cloths and perfectly arranged flowers. The food looked like art, the kind of thing people take pictures of before they eat, Guests were dressed nicely, smiling, laughing, sipping their drinks, as if life had handed them invitations to a fairy tale. It was the kind of place built not just for celebration, but for display, for image, for presenting a life that looked perfect from the outside. Everything was beautiful, everything was polished, everything was staged with care. Everything except her conscience. The moment June stepped through the doors, the atmosphere shifted. Not dramatically, not loudly, but subtly, like a quiet wind that brings a storm just by the way it moves the leaves. Emma was standing near a decorated table, her hands resting on her belly, glowing in a way only expectant mothers can. But when her eyes landed on June, her entire expression froze. Her smile stiffened into something artificial. Her hand tightened around the fabric of her dress, like she was trying to keep herself from unraveling. Her voice came out thin and uneasy. "Aunt June, what are you doing here?" June didn't flinch, she didn't soften. She didn't fake a smile the way everyone else in that room probably expected her to. She looked directly into Emma's eyes, into the eyes of the girl she once babysat, once comforted, once loved like family, and said with steady certainty, "Your father sent me." A gasp rippled through the room. Heads turned, eyes widened. Whispers rushed through the air like cold wind cutting across open fields. Emma's husband shifted uncomfortably, looking from June to his wife with confusion and annoyance. His polished parents stared in stiff horror, as if June had just tracked mud into their perfect world. Emma tried to regain her composure, but her voice cracked like thin glass. He had no right to do that. June stepped closer, her face calm but firm, her voice quiet, but carrying enough power to slice through the noise of the room. "He had every right, Emma, more than anyone in this room, trust me." She set the gift bag on the table and gently pulled out the small wooden box. Its surface was worn with age, carved with the patterns my father once etched with careful hands, polished by years of memories. June placed it in front of Emma with a reverence the object deserved. Inside the box was a letter. A letter I had written in the silence of night, sitting alone at my kitchen table with tears slipping down my face. A letter that held all the words I could never say to her without my voice breaking. A letter filled with love, disappointment, heartbreak, and hope. A letter from a father who had spent his life giving everything he had and receiving less and less in return. Emma stared at the box, her hands hovered above it, trembling. Her eyes flicked around the room, searching for approval or permission or reassurance, anything that would tell her how to react without damaging the perfect image she'd built. The in-laws stared. Her husband looked at his shoes. Everyone waited. June didn't let her escape into performance or appearances. Her voice dropped, soft yet heavy with truth. "That letter is from a man who sacrificed everything for you, and you pushed him out of your life like he was a stranger wandering into your perfect little world." The whispers grew louder. The air thickened with discomfort. Emma's face flushed with shame, anger, confusion, an emotional storm fighting to stay hidden under her painted expression. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Emma opened the wooden lid. She picked up the folded letter with hands that shook like leaves in a storm. The room fell silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. And then she began to read. My letter was simple, almost painfully simple, the kind of simplicity that leaves no space for excuses or confusion because it carries nothing but the truth stripped bare of everything extra. No fancy words, no poetic flourishes, no dramatic declarations, just the quiet, honest truth of a father whose heart had been bruised more than once and still chose to beat for his child. I had folded that letter 3 times with careful fingers, as though folding a memory, a lifetime of memories, into a thin paper that somehow had to hold the weight of my entire fatherhood. I placed it on the table with a calmness I didn't feel, because inside me everything trembled, the years, the hurt, the love, the hope. I wrote about holding her in my arms for the very first time, that moment when her tiny hand curled around my finger, and something inside me shifted forever. I wrote about the nights I stayed awake not because I had the energy, but because she needed me. Those nights when I stood by the window rocking her gently, humming songs off-key, praying she would sleep, praying she would grow up safe. I wrote about the shoes I patched, because I could not afford new ones, how I stitched them in the dim light, threading love through every small repair, making sure her feet would never touch the cold ground, even when my own shoes wore out. I wrote about the birthday cakes I baked, even when I barely had anything in the pantry, how I mixed every ingredient by hand, because I wanted her to feel celebrated, wanted her to feel joy, even if I couldn't give her everything else the world could. I wrote about the times I sat in silence when her teenage anger lashed out at me like lightning, how I never raised my voice back because I remembered being young and hurting without knowing why. I wrote about the sacrifices I made without ever mentioning them, not because I wanted a medal, not because I wanted to be praised, but because being her father never felt like a duty. It felt like a blessing. I tried my best not to fail. I wrote that all I ever wanted, all I ever needed, was to be included. Not honored, not showcased, not bragged about, just included, just seen, just remembered. As Emma read those words, I watched her face the way a person watches a storm approach, slow, inevitable, powerful. At first the tears built quietly, like a thin layer of water rising behind a dam. Her eyes glossed over, blinking too often, as though she could blink the truth away. But the truth has a stubbornness to it, a weight that forces its way through even when the heart resists it. The tears came slow at first, then faster, until one slipped down her cheek, trailing a thin line across her perfect makeup, the kind she always wore like armor. And when that first tear fell, the room changed. Room grew silent in a way that almost felt holy. Not a single fork clinked against a plate, not a single whisper dared to rise. It was the kind of silence that happens when everyone suddenly understands they are witnessing a moment that cannot be undone, a moment that will mark the family forever. Everyone watched her, a woman who had built a life full of pretty things, followers, curated perfection, suddenly realizing she had been missing the most important thing of all, her own father's heart. Her own father's presence, her own father's pain. June watched her too, but her face remained steady, calm, unshaken, not smug, not triumphant, just grounded in truth, like a person who had watched everything unfold and had finally reached the moment she knew would come. June wasn't cold. She simply held a mirror up to the truth without flinching. She stood there like the only person in the room who knew how heavy the weight of neglect could be. When Emma finished the letter, she looked up at me. Her lips trembled as if each word she wanted to say fractured before it could form. Her eyes were red, swollen, and shining with a pain she didn't understand until now. And when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, broken in a way I had never heard from her. I did not think he cared that much. Her voice cracked on the last word. June shook her head slowly, her voice calm but sharp enough to pierce through every layer of Emma's denial. You did not think, she said, because you stopped seeing him as your father. You saw him as a burden, something to hide, something to avoid, but love does not disappear, even when you turn your back on it. The truth hit Emma with such force she sat down immediately, as if her knees could no longer carry the weight of who she had become. Her husband leaned in to comfort her, his hand on her shoulder, but she cried harder, cried like someone who finally understood the damage she had done without meaning to, cried like someone who suddenly discovered the emptiness of the life she tried so hard to display as perfect. She realized in that moment that the world she built was shallow, a world made of pictures and parties, of people who praised her for her image, but did not know her heart. She realized the people around her cared more about appearance than real love, more about status than sincerity, more about hosting events than protecting relationships. And she realized most painfully of all that her father, her quiet, patient, overlooked father, had been fighting to be in her life, while she pushed him away without even noticing the damage she was leaving behind. In that room full of decorations and guests and laughter that had died into stunned silence, she finally saw the truth of everything she had refused to look at. And for the first time in years, she finally saw me. Not the old man she brushed aside, not the father she kept at a distance, but the man who had loved her since the first moment he saw her. The man whose letter broke the room wide open and made everyone see what she had forgotten. Not everyone in that room felt compassion when Emma cried. Not everyone felt the shift in the air the way a parent feels it when their child finally understands the weight of their actions. Some faces stayed stiff, tight around the mouth, untouched by the heartbreak unfolding in front of them. Her in-laws especially looked tense, like this whole situation was dragging them into a place they didn't want to be, a place where their perfect little image of a perfect little family cracked in ways they couldn't control. They exchanged glances, quick, uncomfortable ones, like people who realized something messy had just entered a room they preferred to keep spotless. One of the women, a relative by marriage whose voice usually dripped with sugar but now carried a sharpness that sounded like judgment disguised as curiosity, leaned slightly toward the woman next to her. She whispered, but loud enough for half the room to hear, loud enough that even she knew silence had no chance of covering her words. Why did he not come himself if he cared so much? She asked with a tone that made it clear she was inviting others to judge, inviting them to believe there was more to the story than what they saw. That whisper traveled through the air like a spark looking for dry wood. The room was already heavy with emotion, already trembling with tension, and her comment was the kind that could have changed the direction of the moment if June had not been standing there. June heard it. She didn't pretend she didn't. She didn't soften her expression or offer a polite smile the way most people do when they want to avoid trouble. Instead, she turned her whole body toward the whisperer with a calmness that felt more dangerous than anger. Her eyes narrowed with a quiet, controlled fire, the kind that warned anyone paying attention that June was not a woman who let unfairness stand without being addressed. When she spoke, her voice didn't need to rise. It didn't tremble. It didn't break. It was firm, grounded, and so clear that the room shifted again. He respected her wishes, June said, every word crisp. She told him not to come. And the moment those words left her mouth, the entire room reacted. Gasps rippled through the guests like a wave rolling across sand. Heads turned sharply. Eyes widened. Conversations froze mid-breath. It was as if everyone had been trying to understand the story, trying to guess the missing pieces, and suddenly the missing piece hit them all at once with the force of truth. Emma's in-laws, people who always carried themselves with an air of superiority, people who believed they understood dignity and manners better than anyone else, turned their heads toward her in perfect unison. Her husband's mother, a woman who loved decorum more than honesty and appearances more than vulnerability, raised her eyebrows so high they nearly touched her hairline. She looked at Emma like she was a stranger, like the daughter-in-law she had praised for being well-organized and poised had suddenly become someone she couldn't recognize. Her voice was thin, laced with disbelief, laced with something sharper underneath. "You told your father he was not welcome?" she asked, each word slow, spaced, heavy. And Emma, who moments earlier was crying quietly, softly, privately, now covered her entire face with her hands, as though she wanted to hide from her own actions, as though if she pressed hard enough she could push time backward and undo everything she had done. But life does not work like that. Consequences do not retreat just because someone regrets them. She whispered into her palms, her voice muffled but clear enough that everyone heard it. "I just did not want things to be uncomfortable." June took a step closer to the table, the soft sound of her heel against the floor slicing through the silence. She leaned in slightly, not out of aggression, but out of clarity, like she wanted to make sure Emma would hear her without misunderstanding a single syllable. Her voice remained calm, steady, but the truth in it was sharp enough to pierce the heart of anyone who had ever taken a parent for granted. "Uncomfortable is temporary," June said. "Breaking a father's heart lasts forever." Those words didn't just float in the air, they landed. Heavy, deep, true. They echoed through the room like a bell tolling at the end of something sacred. They didn't scream, they didn't accuse, but they held a weight that forced every person in that room to stop, to feel, to rethink. You could feel people shifting in their chairs, rethinking their own relationships, swallowing their own guilt. Some looked down, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Some looked at Emma with sympathy now instead of judgment, because they realized the punishment came from the truth, not from June. But no one felt it more intensely than Emma. She looked up, her face wet, her eyes swollen, her hands shaking slightly. June's words didn't attack her, they revealed her. They held up the mirror she had avoided for years. And for the first time in her adult life, maybe for the first time since she was a girl, Emma looked like someone who finally understood that love, Real love is not measured by comfort or convenience or how smooth an event looks to the outside world. Love is messy. Love is inconvenient. Love requires presence, not perfection. And as she absorbed June's words, as they settled into her heart like stones sinking into deep water, Emma finally understood the full weight of what she had done. And it shook her so deeply she could barely sit upright, shook her so hard she trembled like the ground beneath her feet had finally cracked open and revealed everything she had buried inside herself. Emma pushed her chair back so suddenly that it scraped across the polished floor, creating a sound that sliced through the tense air like a blade. Her hands trembled as she tried to wipe her tears, but they only smeared across her cheeks and left streaks of mascara that made her look even more lost, more vulnerable, more like a child than a grown woman about to become a mother herself. She muttered something, an apology, an excuse, a plea. No one could really hear it, but her voice cracked in the middle, and that was enough for everyone to understand that she needed to escape. She stood and walked quickly toward the exit, her steps uneven, her breathing heavy, pushing past decorations, past guests pretending not to stare, past her husband who reached out to touch her arm but missed. The moment she stepped outside, the doors closed behind her with a dull thud that sounded final, like the closing of a chapter she wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. Air outside was cooler than inside, crisp with the smell of early afternoon and distant traffic, and Emma leaned against the railing as if she needed something solid to keep herself upright. Her chest rose and fell in deep, shaky breaths. She looked up at the sky, blue and wide and mercilessly indifferent, as though searching for something, maybe forgiveness, maybe clarity, maybe the courage to face herself. Tears streamed down her face freely now, not hidden, not held back for the sake of appearances. Out here, there was nowhere to hide from the truth she had just been confronted with. A few seconds later the door opened again, but gently this time, slow and deliberate, as if the person behind it respected the fragility of the moment. It was June. She didn't storm out. She didn't rush. She stepped outside with the quiet authority of someone who had lived long enough to understand that some wounds needed air and some lessons needed silence before they could take root. She didn't touch Emma. She didn't speak right away. She simply stood a few feet away, giving her the space to break in private the way she had tried so hard to hold herself together in public. For a long moment they stayed like that, Emma shaking, June watching, the world holding its breath. Then finally, after what felt like a lifetime compressed into seconds, Emma spoke. Her voice was raw, barely more than a whisper, trembling at the edges like a thin piece of paper being pulled apart. "I just wanted everything to be perfect," she said. "I didn't want people judging me. I thought he would embarrass me." She covered her face again, ashamed not of the tears, but of the confession itself. Those words felt dirty in her mouth now, selfish in a way she had never noticed before. The truth of them tasted bitter, like something she could no longer swallow without feeling sick. June inhaled slowly, deeply, the kind of breath a person takes when they're about to drop a truth so heavy it needs a moment of preparation. She stepped closer, but still kept enough distance to let Emma feel her own weight without feeling cornered. When she spoke, her voice was low and steady, almost tender, but lined with iron, strong enough to hold Emma up, sharp enough to cut through her excuses. "He worked his whole life so you could have the things you were embarrassed of him for," June said. "Your father gave you every piece of stability you stand on, every comfort you take for granted. He tore his body apart to make sure you had shoes on your feet, food on the table, school bags, birthday cakes, everything. Your father is the reason you stand here today in a clean dress with your life put together. And you pushed him away like his love was something cheap, something disposable." Emma squeezed her eyes shut as new tears spilled out, faster, heavier, unstoppable. Her entire body trembled now from her shoulders down to her hands, down to her knees that bent inward as if they could no longer support the weight of her guilt. She tried to stand tall, tried to pull herself together, but the truth had hit her too hard. Her strength cracked like thin glass. She sank down until she was nearly crouched, her hand gripping the railing to keep from collapsing completely. Her sobs grew louder, rawer, deeper, the kind that came from a place inside her she had ignored for years, the kind that came from realizing she had built a life based not on strength, but on distancing herself from the man who had given her everything. A father she had been ashamed of simply because he didn't fit the polished, picture-perfect version of herself she tried to present to the world. June didn't touch her, she didn't have to. The truth itself was doing the work. And for the first time since she was a teenager, Emma was not crying because she was angry or overwhelmed or misunderstood. She was crying because she finally understood exactly what she had done, not just today, not just with the baby shower, but across years. Little slights, dismissive comments, forgotten invitations, ignored calls, excuses made to avoid embarrassment, distance created not out of necessity, but out of pride. In that moment, Emma finally saw the full picture of the pain she had caused, and the weight of that realization nearly brought her to the ground. I was sitting in my old recliner, the same one I had fallen asleep in countless nights after long shifts, the same one Emma used to crawl into when she was little just to rest her head on my chest. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. I had not moved much since June texted me saying she read the letter. My mind kept replaying every moment of her childhood, every scraped knee, every tooth fairy dollar, every graduation picture, every proud smile I thought we had shared. My heart felt heavy but strangely calm, like the air right before a storm breaks. That was when my phone rang. The sound startled me. It cut into the silence like a sudden lightning strike. I looked at the screen and my breath caught in my throat. It was her. My daughter, Emma. Her name glowed on the phone like something I had not seen in a long time, something both familiar and foreign. For a moment my thumb hovered over the screen. I almost didn't pick up. I didn't know if I could handle another blow, another rejection, another cold dismissal. But something deep inside me, a father's instinct maybe, or the small remaining hope I'd buried under years of hurt, told me to answer. I pressed the button and brought the phone to my ear. All I heard at first was breathing, unsteady, shaky, like she had been crying for a long time. Then her voice came through, so soft I barely recognized it. Dad? Just that one word, but it carried everything: regret, fear, guilt, sorrow, longing. It dragged something inside me open, something I had been trying to close for years. I didn't respond right away. I didn't say, "Hey, sweetheart," or "It's okay," or anything that came automatically to fathers who hadn't been pushed aside. I just sat there, the phone warm against my ear, waiting for her to say what she needed to say, waiting to finally hear the truth from her lips. She sniffed, and I could picture her wiping her face the way she used to, when she was a child who'd gotten caught misbehaving. "Dad, I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked on the last word. She inhaled sharply, like she had to pull air into lungs that didn't want to expand. Then she whispered again, faster this time, desperate. "I'm so sorry, I messed up so badly." My fingers tightened around the phone. My heart felt too big for my chest. I could hear her crying, really crying, not the polite kind of crying people do to get sympathy, but the crying that comes when the truth finally hits and you can't hide from it anymore. "Dad, I shouldn't have said what I said. I shouldn't have treated you the way I have. I shouldn't have kept pushing you away." She paused, sobbing softly into the receiver. "You didn't deserve any of it." The tears that had refused to come the night she told me not to come to her baby shower, they finally came now. Quiet, slow, hot. I didn't make a sound, but I felt them slip down my face. "I hurt you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I hurt you over and over and I didn't even see it. I didn't see anything, and I'm so sorry. Please, Dad, please forgive me." She went on, her words thick with guilt. I thought I needed to look a certain way, be a certain kind of person, and I was scared people would judge me for having a dad who..." She stopped, choked on the next breath. "A dad who worked hard, a dad who sacrificed, a dad who gave me everything." She cried harder. "A dad I didn't deserve." My heart twisted at that. I never wanted her to feel unworthy. I never wanted her to feel small. But I also knew she needed this moment to face the truth, to acknowledge it, to say the words she'd never said before. "I love you," she whispered, barely audible. Dad, I love you so much. I didn't act like it, I didn't show it, but I do. I always have. And I want you in my life. I want my baby to know you. I want them to know their grandpa. I want them to have the love you gave me. Her voice cracked again, and then she said something I had longed to hear for years. Please come back into my life. I closed my eyes. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. I let her words sink into me like warm water finally reaching frozen skin. And for the first time in so long, she didn't sound like a stranger shaped by other people's expectations. She sounded like my daughter again. My little girl. The one who used to run to me when she was scared, who used to hold my hand crossing the street, who used to look at me like I was her whole world. And in that moment, even through the pain, I felt something inside me thaw, the beginning of forgiveness, the beginning of healing. A week passed slowly, like time itself was giving both of us space to breathe, to think, to process everything that had been said on that trembling phone call. Every day I felt a strange mix of nerves and anticipation, like I was waiting for something important but fragile. I kept replaying her voice in my mind, the way she said I'm sorry, the way she said Dad, the way she said I love you. Those words settled in places inside me that had been hollow for years. They worked their way into cracks I thought could never be repaired. And then, finally, on a quiet morning touched by soft sunlight, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, there she was, Emma, standing on my porch the same way she used to when she was a little girl who had scraped her knee and didn't know how to explain the pain. Her eyes were swollen, her cheeks blotchy from crying, her hands trembling just enough to give her away. For a moment she didn't speak, didn't take a breath, didn't blink. She just looked at me, and in that look I saw everything: regret, guilt, longing, love, fear, and hope, all tangled together like threads she had finally decided to untangle. And then she took a step forward, and another, and suddenly she crashed into me, her arms wrapping around me with a force that nearly knocked the air from my lungs. She buried her face against my chest and cried, not polite tears, not light tears, but deep, heavy sobs that shook through her entire body. Tears that had been building for years, waiting for this moment to finally spill out. My arms closed around her instantly. It was instinct, muscle memory, something older than either of us. I held her the same way I used to when she was a toddler who woke up from a nightmare. I held her the same way I had held her after her first heartbreak. I held her the same way I had held her the day she left for college, and I pretended not to cry until the car pulled away. I held her strong, steady, safe, because that was the only way I ever knew how to hold my daughter. We stood like that for a long time. I didn't rush her. I didn't ask her to calm down. I didn't tell her it was okay, because it wasn't just about today. It was everything we had been carrying for years. It was every hurt that had been brushed aside, every silence that had hardened into distance, every moment she had pushed me away without realizing how deeply it cut. When she finally pulled back, her voice was small but clear. Dad, I want to fix this. I want us back. So we sat at my kitchen table, the one she had eaten at thousands of times growing up, the one covered in old scratches and memories. We talked for hours, long, slow, unfiltered hours that stretched from morning into afternoon and into evening. We talked about the past, the moments she didn't understand back then but finally saw clearly now. We talked about the nights I worked overtime and the way I hid my tiredness so she wouldn't worry. We talked about the years she pulled away because she thought she needed to look like someone else's idea of success. We talked about the people who influenced her, the in-laws who raised their eyebrows, the co-workers who teased her, the friends who made her feel like her roots weren't good enough. We talked about the fears she had, of being judged, of being looked down on, of not fitting the polished version of adulthood she had imagined. And for the first time in years, we understood each other. We rebuilt the bridge slowly, with care, with honesty, with laughter that returned shyly at first and then warmed into the natural rhythm we once had. Each story we shared felt like laying another plank down, another support beam, another connection we thought was gone forever. We didn't try to erase the past. We acknowledged it. We didn't pretend it didn't hurt. We let the pain sit between us until it softened. By the time she left that night, she hugged me again, longer, tighter, fuller. And in that hug, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. My daughter had come home. Not just to my house, but to me. The day her baby was born is a day I will remember until my last breath. The sun had barely risen when I got the call, but her voice was urgent, breathless, full of fear and excitement. "Dad, it's time. Please come. I need you." Those words filled something in me I didn't even know was still empty. I rushed to the hospital, and when I walked into her room, she reached for me immediately. Not hesitating, not hiding, not thinking about who might judge her. She held my hand with both of hers, gripping tight like I was the anchor she needed to stay steady. Her husband was there, but she looked at me with eyes that said one thing clearly. "Don't leave, I need you here." And I didn't, not for a second. I stayed through every contraction, every breath, every moment she squeezed my hands so hard I thought she might snap something. I wiped her forehead with a cool cloth. I whispered encouragement. I told her how proud I was, how strong she was, how she was doing everything right. I held her the same way she once held my finger when she was a newborn, tiny, fragile, dependent on me for comfort. When the baby finally arrived, the room filled with a new sound, a soft, beautiful cry that seemed to echo with promise. Emma was exhausted, drenched in sweat, shaking from the intensity of it all, but she still reached out, touching my arm with trembling fingers. "Dad, hold the baby." The nurse placed the tiny bundle into my arms, and in that instant time stood still. The baby was warm, soft, impossibly small, wrapped in a blanket with only a round little face peeking out. As I looked down at that child, the next generation, the piece of my daughter, the piece of my heart I didn't know I had been waiting for, my throat tightened so hard I could barely breathe. Emma watched me with tired eyes, full of love, full of gratitude, full of something deeper than forgiveness. She whispered, her voice cracking, her words meant to heal everything that had ever broken between us. "Meet your grandfather, the one who never gave up on me." And in that single moment, every wound, every tear, every painful silence from the past finally made sense, because they had all led to this, to a new beginning, to a restored family, to love rediscovered, to a piece of my heart I thought I had lost, but had finally found again. Life has a way of quieting you just long enough for you to finally hear the truth you've been avoiding. And for Emma, that truth came slowly, painfully, like sunlight breaking through after a storm that lasted far too long. She told me later that in the days after the baby shower, she kept replaying every second in her mind, every word June had said, every look her in-laws had exchanged, every ounce of shame that had washed over her when the reality of her choices finally stood in front of her like a mirror she could not escape. She realized that she had spent years trying to polish the version of herself she wanted the world to see, and in the process she had pushed away the very person who had made her capable of standing tall in the first place. Life had twisted her priorities, and she had let it happen without even noticing. She admitted that she had been scared of judgment, scared of appearing less than perfect, scared of people whispering behind her back. And somewhere in that fear, she had convinced herself that removing her father from the picture was easier than facing uncomfortable questions. But she learned that day that perfection is fragile and shallow, and that the people who demand it from you will never hold your heart when it shatters. Only real family does that. She learned that a father is not someone you tuck away when the world is watching, not someone you hide because his hands are worn or his clothes are simple or his life did not sparkle the way others expected. A father is not a shadow trailing behind you that you only acknowledge when convenient. A father is a foundation, a steady, unmovable, deeply rooted force that holds you up even when your own knees give out. And she realized how dangerous it had been to treat something so sacred as something optional. She told me her biggest regret was not the baby shower itself, but every small choice before it, every moment she had ignored my calls, every holiday she had chosen someone else over me, every time she convinced herself I would understand without her ever bothering to ask. She finally saw that love is not endless if you keep cutting it off at the source. But I learned too. I learned that sometimes you have to step back and let people fall into the truth on their own. You can talk, you can plead, you can cry, but some lessons don't stick until life hands them the mirror directly. I learned that silence can be a teacher, that distance can reveal more than arguments ever could, that letting go for a moment does not mean giving up forever. I learned that a parent's heart stretches, bends, cracks, and aches, but it never truly closes. And I learned that forgiveness is not a weakness. It is a quiet strength that keeps a family from collapsing entirely. And now when she looks at me, it is different. She no longer looks past me with hurried eyes or at me with filtered judgment. Now she looks at me with gratitude that trembles a little at the edges, with softness that comes from realizing what almost slipped away. She sees not a burden but a blessing, not an obstacle but a protector, not a reminder of the past she wanted to outgrow, but the man who shaped the best parts of who she is. And my grandchild, my tiny, soft, warm piece of the future, will grow up knowing something Emma had to learn the hard way. That love endures when pride does not, that family survives when appearances fade, that mistakes can be rewritten when the heart is willing to lay down its ego and pick up the truth. My grandchild will grow up knowing that forgiveness is powerful, that humility restores, and that a father's love does not disappear even when it is pushed away. And there is peace in that. A quiet, steady peace that tells me everything we went through was leading us right here, to understanding, to healing, to a place where love finally speaks louder than fear.